geopolitics and how we need to interpret, to decipher present situation. There are many levels and many possibilities. Today, everybody is obliged to take a side. If we accept Russia is right, so let us repeat Russian propaganda. If we are on the side of the West, that means immediately that Putin is criminal, all Russia is wrong, Russian people is barbarians supporting such regime. So everything follows from our moment of taking of position. There are only two positions, no three. So it is difficult to stay neutral in that situation, but I will try. Not maybe neutral, because I'm not neutral at all, but I would prefer to put the situation in some context, not to give arguments of Russian part, you know them, I presume, not defend against accusation of the Western position, you know that much better. And I think that we are living in the reality of two close languages in the structuralist sense. So there are two languages, foreign languages, without translation. Western language in the sense of structuralism, language against discourse. And all possible discourse is put in one language or in other language. So discourse depends on the language. And when there is the same language with different discourses, we could understand each other. When we have two languages without translation, so everybody hears only what is said in his or her language. And the speech of the other is similar to the black noise or white noise that is called white noise. So some sounds without a meaning. So when we are in the language of the West doesn't hear and doesn't want to hear anything from the language of the Russia. And the language of the West is almost the language of the world. So we are isolated and nobody is going to hear us. Good. So now we are going to discover our proper language and establish it as it should be done, because we tried to speak Western language. We failed. Nobody understood what was said in our Russian version of broken English. So we tried, we failed. It's so over. Now we are going to speak our own language that we need first to establish, to defend, to re-establish, to create in the new condition, because for too long, we tried to do impossible thing, to the part of the global civilization. We are not the part of the global civilization. We are civilization by ourselves. Huntington was absolutely right. Fukuyama was, with whom I have very interesting discussions, by the way, was absolutely wrong. There are civilizations with great S, and in the end, and one of them is Russia. And we had no other possibility to prove that Huntington was right without attacking Ukraine. It's sad to say, but it's probably us who start this conflictual situation in order to be heard. And after that, all dialogue on the premise of the existence of a global civilization is broken apart. So now we are isolated island. Russia is island. It is not the part of the world, it's big island, big isolated island. So, and here we come to the geopolitical understanding, geopolitical science. I started to develop geopolitics 30 years ago when Russia only started to feel herself the part of the global civilization, global West. And everybody was optimistic, becoming the part of this humanity, civil rights theory, human rights theory, this global world. We entered in this process. We accepted the Western identity. We have abandoned Soviet identity. We have forgotten Tsarist pre-Soviet identity, and we try to be like everybody else. And at that moment, not being too much engaged in the Soviet system, neither in liberal system, I have discovered geopolitics formulated by English, British authors like Halford Mackinder, who tried to explain the great game between British Empire and Russian Empire in the terms of sea power and land power. Maybe it was, in his time, situational, a part of the British imperialist thinking of the world, but in my eyes, that was explosion of the real truth. And after that, I followed Mackinder, and I have discovered that we had Eurasian movement in the 20s in the West among white immigration. There was German school of geopolitics. So geopolitics was the tool to decipher the world we were in the beginning of the 90s. From that moment, I started to develop Eurasian School of Geopolitics and Russian Geopolitical School. And from this point of view, basing on the British vision, of Anglo-Saxon vision of the world, the main principles were sea power against land power. What is sea power according to Mackinder? It is not just the West. It is modernity. It is technology. It is capitalism. It is market society. It is Carthage against Rome, or Athens against Sparta, or Venice against Byzantine Empire. So that was one civilization basing on the materialist approach and strategically on the dominance overseas, on the colonial attitudes, against the other kind of civilization where totally different values were put in the center of the life. The dignity, the military power, tradition, conservatism, national interests, families, religion, Christianity. So modernity against the tradition, inscribed in the space, in the historical space. That was geopolitics. And applying this methodology to Russia, I came to the conclusion that that explains everything that is now and will come. So from that moment, applying this method to analysis of Russian Federation in an early stage, I deduced from this application that there will be the big war between continents, the great war of continents. So confrontation between sea power and land power. Land power represented by Russia, by heartland, sea power represented by modern globalist, postmodern, liberal West. So that went radically against everything that Russian government in the 90s thought. But I was heard by Russian military. From the beginning of the 90s, I started to make lessons on geopolitics in Russian General Staff Institution. And for them that was absolutely necessary because they have lost explanation of what is going on in the ideological terms, and they badly needed something as alternative. They could not understand why NATO went more and more closer to our borders, with us abandoning our communist ideology. They sincerely could not understand why. And with geopolitics introduced in the general staff, everything was theoretically, at least logically, put in the context. That was beginning of rise of the secret rise of Mr. Putin to power. And now, 20 years, Putin tried to accomplish a reaffirmation of the sovereignty of the land power and heartland and Eurasia in a peaceful way. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. So he said that, nobody listened. He tried to put that in some geo-economical steps. Nobody nobody understood what he was doing. Finally, there is only one explanation of what is going on in Maidan, in Ukraine, in the post-Soviet space in general. The sea power took the momentum of the fall of the Soviet Union, and now we are approaching to our president's discourse, but in the context. And there come the sea power took the momentum of the fall of the Soviet Union in order to seize the control over the liberated space. It is not about ideology, race, ethnicity, or religion. It was just that. Geopolitical game, great game renewed once more. And in that situation, Putin, when he came to power, started to reverse the fall of the Soviet Union, clearly. For him, it was the geopolitical catastrophe. Geopolitical, that is the key word. Geopolitical catastrophe, not ideological, neither national, nor ideological, nor racial or religious, geopolitical catastrophe. And this catastrophe consisted in the brute or root fact, imposing the control of the sea power on the territories around Russia that logically belong to the land power. There is no neutrality in geopolitics. So what we liberated, they took for themselves. Who they? Not the West, sea power. And Putin started to regain the control over post-Soviet space, following Brzezinski line. Brzezinski has said, Russia will not return to the independent sovereignty without reacquiring the influence over post-Soviet space, first of all, on Ukraine. So the fight for Ukraine approached from that moment, from the election of the Putin as historical leader of Russia, trying to defend our geopolitical interests. That is an explanation of what is going on now. But the sea power proceeded. They continued to try to take away from us the part of post-Soviet space. And when some leader of neutral or pro-Russian or not so anti-Russian as it was necessary came to power, as Yanukovych, for example, they started to overcome and put them down with any means. Regime change operation, Maidan. Putin has responded to Maidan by reacquiring Crimea and the part of eastern Ukraine. But that was enough. That was just defensive action of heartland against sea power. And the borders were so critical for Russia that conflict, next stage of the conflict, was inevitable. Absolutely by geopolitical logic. You know, I don't want, maybe you will discuss between yourself or with our other guest, who started that. I don't want to enter in that discussion, who started. I try to explain why it started. It was it was put into reality. Why it happened? Why, and not who started it. So, and what happened, and what is happening now? So it is the fight between land power, very hardly damaged with the end of the Soviet Union, and still damaged after the fall of the Soviet Union, all these 30 years, by pressure of the sea power. And there comes the moment when counter-attack began. The direct words of Zbigniew Brzezinski, with whom I met 2005 in Washington. And that these words were written in his book, Grand Chessboard. Without Ukraine, Russia cannot become once more the empire. With Ukraine inside of Russian zone of control, it will become empire once more. That is a kind of law, nothing personal. And when I have asked Mr. Brzezinski, there was the chessboard between us, there in the photo, whether he considered that chess is the game for two. He has said, no, it's for one. You make step, you turn the table, you make the other step. There is no other. The West, global West, the West after the victory over Soviet Union, globalist West, modern, postmodern, liberal West, doesn't recognize the other. There is one player chess game, not three player, one player. You make the step, you turn the chessboard, you make the other. White, black, one player. That was very sincere from Brzezinski part. We saw that in Belgrade, in Yugoslavia. We saw that in Syria, in color revolution in the Arab world. We see it in Iraq, in Afghanistan, everywhere. One player game. And interesting, Brzezinski has dedicated his book to me with very important inscription, with the wish to Mr. Dugin to change completely his ideas, to reverse these ideas. So, because I should, in order to be part of this chessboard game, my mission is to help to Mr. Brzezinski to move the figures on the chessboard. There is no other option. No Macron, no nobody, no Trump, no Scholz. Please move the figures as I told you. It's your mission. And Putin, appearing from the table on the other side, has said, can I take part in the game? That is why we have attacked Ukraine. We just reappeared on the global scale as an active player playing against this great game, as the subject, as sovereign player. We try to do that by all other means. So we weren't led to do that. There in the global that to affirm multipolarity or sovereignty is prohibited not only for us but for American president. When Trump tried to do something without this control, he was blamed and replaced brutally and demonized and put outside of the rules. So for sure we have broken the rules. For sure we have broken the rules of chess as one-player game. It is hard, it is violent, it is bloody, as always. But that is the end, real end of unipolar world, where decision is taken only in one by one existing center. There is appearance of the second center, and at the same time there is an appearance, manifestation of the third center. Immediately, that is China, that has its own position, its own Ukraine in Taiwan, and its own sovereignty already put under question and more directly reaffirming. So welcome to the three polar worlds with possibility to multiply the quantity, the number of poles, because it is not all. It's open possibility, and this possibility opens the window of opportunity for Europe to reaffirm its own geopolitical independence and sovereignty, not to be just mover of one Anglo-Saxon player. That is opportunity for India, that is for sure opportunity for Latin America, for Islamic world, and that explains the last meetings of Mr. Putin with Prime Minister of Pakistan, of President of Iran, and his relation with China. So, geopolitical vision of this war or military operation, special military operation in Ukraine is about that. It is about geopolitics. And the decision to be on one part or on other part is not in favor or against Russian, either Russian or Ukrainians. It is totally different choice. It's totally different option. Or whether you are with unipolarity, agonizing and still present here, or you side with emerging multipolarity, not necessarily Russian. It is not about bipolarity. Russia is too small now, too weak to afford bipolarity. We just defend our right to be one of the civilizations, one of the poles, accepting from the very beginning the existence of other sphere of influence, other poles, other civilizations. The number of accepted big players is not limited. It is up to humanity to define what humanity wants. So choosing the side now with the West, whether with the West, either with the West or with Russia, it is the choice between unipolarity and multipolarity, not with Russia. You could hate us, but if you love yourself, you somehow take some distance in front of the Western univocal indignation of what we have done. So history is like that. Putin is a less ideological motivated person that we could imagine. He is neither nationalist nor liberal nor communist. He is just geopolitician. He is realist, pragmatist. And what he has done was absolutely inevitable by the rules of geopolitics if we accept that geopolitics is not the game of Brzezinski, one-player game. That is the context. I finish here. So I could give the words to my colleagues or to answer your question, but start with Valery Korovin, one of the leader of International Eurasian Movement.